Hello and welcome to another episode of Women Are the Medicine, a podcast where we help to spread the wisdom of women. I'm your host Naz, and I'm thrilled to bring you this week's guest, Gemma Brady. So for those of you that don't know Gemma, she is founder of Sister Stories, a women's circle movement which is on a mission to make going to circles as common as a yoga class. She founded Sister Stories in 2017 whilst working as an award-winning documentary maker. And since then, Sister Stories has grown to be a global movement with over 500 women from around the world training with her in her CPD accredited methodology on how to hold powerful, ethically held circle spaces. Gemma, it's so good to have you here. I'm thrilled because we keep having to jump through hoops. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a complete pleasure. Yeah, the technology almost thwarted us, but we're here, we made it, we're doing it.
We're doing it. Gemma, I absolutely love the clarity of your mission, and I feel like you have such a gentle yet forceful energy, not in a masculine way, just in an expansive way. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the gifts that you are bringing to this world when it comes to sharing your mission with Sister Stories.
It's so interesting now that you describe me then as having that gentle but powerful approach, because when I was growing up, I felt like an incredibly shy person. I found it incredibly hard to share my voice. And I didn't really feel, I would look at people around me who had strong opinions or strong convictions, and that didn't feel like me. And really interestingly, I've been on a long journey to find my voice. And one of the places that I've found my voice is in Circle, a space where you can share authentically who you are, the truth of your experiences. But coming across Sister Stories as a concept, as something that I created in 2017, a place where I could really authentically share myself, has helped me find that conviction and that sense of purpose in life that before felt a bit floundering or wasn't that strong. And so it's a space, Circle is a space that's allowed me to be really gentle, to not have to change who I am, to not try and be some impressive, powerful, accomplished person, but actually to show up as I am in the moment, as someone who gets nervous when they share their voice aloud, as someone who doesn't always have lots to say, who often prefers silence to words, and finding a space where the space of Circle, which can hold all of that, has been such a huge part of my journey, and why I've become so passionate about not only bringing it into other women's lives, but actually wondering what would society be like if all of us had access to spaces where we can show up exactly as we are, where we can take off the masks that we wear in our daily lives, the roles we feel we have to perform, where we can come together as human beings in our authenticity and find our voices together.
I feel almost palpably the sigh of relief from introverts all over the world who've just connected with what you've said then about not having to be this big, bold, not needing to make yourself someone or something that you're not, and yet still have a really powerful mission and clarity that, and I think it's a big one. I think that holding circles and gathering in the way that you do and encouraging people to do that and making it as common as going to a yoga class has the potential to change the world. And I don't know if you agree with me, but I'm sure that I'm going to give you some space to share. But for those people who've never been to Circle, who don't really know what we're talking about, give us an overview of what a circle is and what can really happen in those gatherings that you don't know until you've been there and experienced it.
Describing what happens in circles is one of the most challenging things to do because it can be a really magical space. But let me put it this way. the art of coming together in circle and the act of coming together in circle it's not new, it's ancient. It's one of our most, it's a sort of indigenous practice to our humanity. People have gathered in circle around the fire to cook, to share, to warm their hands since the beginning of time. And circle has always been a place where human beings would come together and share stories. And stories, and sharing the stories of our lives and the mythology of the human race, but actually in my circles we talk about the stories of our own lives, is how we make sense of being human. It actually serves a neurological purpose. And so the art of circle in the Western world, at least, was lost for many, many years. And we started to have lots of top-down structures, so more triangular structures, in our white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalistic society, where it says that there needs to be a leader at the top, often a white man, and there's this top-down way of doing things. And circle is a space which is non-hierarchical in its shape. There's no beginning or no end to a circle, and it's a space where we can come together as we are as human beings without hierarchy and do something that feels really important and quite rare, which in the kind of circles that I hold and that I teach, sharing circles, we simply share what it means to us to be human, the truths about our lives, in a way that is genuine, that's authentic, that's connected. And as I mentioned earlier, where we're not trying to play any particular part or perform, we're just sharing the truth of our experiences. And while we do that, others listen. And they listen without giving any advice, without having a comeback or an idea or anything, no response. We're not doing it to gain anything other than the simple act of being seen and heard. And that feels really radical, to do that, to simply show up without agenda. We're not trying to get anywhere in a circle. We don't have a fixed outcome that we're driving towards. Again, in this sort of capitalistic society we live in, there's always this often an outcome that's we desire to have. We're not doing that in circle. We're just enjoying coming together. And so at the heart, it's an incredibly simple space, but in the simplicity of that space, some really beautiful things can happen. So the first thing that can happen is that when we hear ourselves share aloud, we can have such new levels of understanding about what it means to be us, about how we're experiencing our lives. We can have revelations about things that we should do or not do, or how we want to shift. It can be a deep act of helping you to understand the self more deeply. But there's another interesting thing that happens, which is when we sit in a circle and we all share truthfully and vulnerably our experiences, each of us will find that no matter who is in that group, no matter what they say, will recognise something. It will relate to and recognise something in what every single person says. And that's because of a process called neural mirroring, where literally our brains are making patterns of recognition, like, oh, that's like my life, that's like mine. And when that happens, we can realise that actually underneath we're all the same. We look very different, our lives are very different, but we're all the same fundamentally. And that is an extraordinary exercise in compassion for ourselves. Oh, it's not just me that feels this way. It's not just me that has these challenges, but also as an extraordinary act of compassion for others. Wow, I judged that person when they walked in the room. I thought I knew who they were. Listen what's going on. It's really powerful, but so simple.
My God, there's so much there that just screams, we need this as human beings. We need so much to be witnessed, to feel like our feelings are valid, that we matter, that we have stories to tell. So I love your mission, and I just wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing some of the tangible, even if they're subtle or nuanced, the tangible benefits either of a client, obviously anonymity, but any clients or any case studies, or you want to use yourself as an example of how it changes your life to go to a circle like this that has that safety and that structure and that facilitation, how can it change your life just as an ordinary person who's never been to circle before?
It's so interesting to be asked that question, because when I think about both my own experience and people who I've seen come through over the years, the simple act of coming into this kind of circle space just for 2 hours, it's not like, you don't need to commit forever, coming for 2 hours and then perhaps coming back, it can be completely life-shifting for people on so many levels. And so what I've found often happens, there's sort of a couple of steps. The first step is that people come and they practice, because it is a practice, sharing their voice authentically and having the experience in the room where it's not met with judgment, it's not met with gasps of shock at this thing that has been revealed. It's met with deep compassion, care, and understanding. And when you practice sharing your voice like that, it can be such a bridge to your own authenticity in other areas of your life. And so you can start to have more truthful and more courageous conversations with people around you. You can start to show up in your relationships differently, not imagining what the other person might think or say or how they might respond, that with a more connected, congruent sense of who you are and what you want to say. That can be really quite extraordinary to start living your life in that way. And it doesn't happen on day one. As I mentioned, it's a practice. In circle, you get to experiment with sharing the truth of who you are and your experiences. You get to practice that act of being met with unconditional care and regard, and then slowly experimenting with that rippling out. So that's one thing. That personal impact can be huge. It can change how you speak to people. It can really change how you understand the person standing in front of you, because what they're saying and how they're acting might be one thing, but it can help you look deeper. What's going on for that person? Where can I extend a hand of compassion? What might they be carrying in their lives that I don't understand? So a classic example would be, if you're in a traditional workplace with a boss and they're being really quite tricky, having a sense of the person underneath the action and bringing that compassion to your interactions can really, again, shift how you move through the world and how you relate. So that's one thing. And then I've seen so many people have massive shifts on a professional level. So to give you one really specific example, and she will be happy to be named because she shared her story lots of times around her journey with Circle, a woman called Umbareen Siddiqui, and she's a consultant anaesthetist. So she has an incredibly responsible, high pressure, high stakes job in the NHS. And she came and sat with Circle with me for years and then trained in the principles of Circle. And I was talking to her one day about what it's done for her. And she said, it made me a better doctor to my patients. The questions I was asking, the view I was taking of their lives, the way that I was showing up in the space with real listening ears, it's changed how I interact. Now that to me feels quite extraordinary, because I've talked a lot about us learning to speak in Circle, but what's also important is that we learn to listen. We learn to sit and truly listen to the person in front of us. And when we practice those two things, the ripple effects outside the space can be huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Really listening and really understanding what's going on underneath the surface. I feel, I often teach my clients in the relationship space about going there, going deeper, allowing that pause so that you can allow your nervous system as well, your body to respond. We're picking up all of these non-verbal cues. It's not just about listening to the words that people are saying, but we are in this time-deprived existence right now where every like we're doing a task and we're thinking about something else. And I think we have lost this art of listening, and we want people to get to the point and we want to be understood, and we're losing all of the nuance and the beauty of just being with someone at their own pace. So I love that you used that example of the anaesthetist. My goodness, yeah, what an impact if if doctors all over the world or the UK could find the time to do this, right?
I often wonder what the world would be like if from the day we go to school, from our early childhood experiences, we had spaces where we came together in this way, this circle type way, where there's truthful sharing, compassionate listening, and really allowing our humanity to step forward. What would it be like if our schools taught this? What would it be like if our corporations had spaces where people could be truly themselves? What would it be like if government had a space for this kind of relating? I genuinely think that this kind of bringing this kind of humanity to the forefront, where it becomes part of the way that we relate to one another as human beings, could be really transformative for our world. And it's not rocket science, it's simple. It's really quite simple. It's just that as a society, we've learned to mask and to perform and to not tell the truth about who we are. And it's slowly killing us. It's killing us as individuals. It's killing our connection to humanity. And it's really damaging for our planet.
And as with things that can be so simple, it's very easy to overlook them or dismiss them or think, oh, that's not for me, because you think you grasp the concept of sitting in circle. But again, I think unless someone's actually been in that kind of space, that non-judgmental space, and been able to share, and there's a real skill with the facilitation, which I'm going to come onto in a bit and ask you about that. But I just want to know, where did this idea come from? So, and I don't know if you want to go back, you were a documentary filmmaker, so your business was telling people stories, or not even telling them, but helping them to tell themselves their story. So how did that shape the emergence of this beautiful, beautiful business that you have now?
That work that I did in the documentary world has been absolutely, it was really transformative for me in terms of understanding the power of people's stories. And the sort of specialism that I had in that world is I would often go into spaces and scenarios where people had experienced some kind of trauma, be that medical trauma in their life. Like, I was operating in the world where we were very delicately telling very sensitive stories about people's lives. And one of my jobs was to help people articulate that, to invite them into a space where they felt safe enough to share, and where they were asked the right questions to slowly unpick and unfurl and articulate the stories of their lives. And there was one really formative experience in particular that I had. I used to have a senior role on a series in the UK called 24 Hours in A&E. It's ostensibly about a hospital in London, but actually, really the series is about love. And so it tells the story of people who've come through the hospital in a 24-hour period, and each, either patient or their family member, will tell the story of their lives. And we had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in my time working on that series come and sit in an interview chair, and every single person would have a story that would make your heart break, that would completely astonish you. And no matter what they looked like, no matter what we thought of them when they walked in the door, the life we imagined they had, there was always something completely astonishing and surprising and wonderful underneath the surface. And it was that experience of really finding actually my own judgments that I thought I was a non-judgmental person, but actually we all do it all the time without even thinking. We imagine who the person in front of us is. Through sitting people in that chair, I really got a sense of what it's like to open up a space for someone to tell the truth and be listened to. And it was that experience that informed, that really helped me think about, what would this be like in a community context? I didn't know about the art of circling then, and the idea of bringing people together this way. I came from a very different angle, where I thought, gosh, it's interesting with the individual. What would it be like collectively? And I had that thought. And then in 2017, I had sudden brain surgery. I had a hemorrhage as a result of that surgery. I was really quite unwell. I was really unwell. And in my recovery period, I was not really able to do much. But on one of the first walks I went on, I had this name, Sister Stories, drop into my head, and the format of a circle drop into my brain. And it was like all the strands came together. It was quite an extraordinary moment. Some people would call it a spiritual download. Other people would call it an idea. I don't know which one of those two it was, but all these strands of my work previously and my sense that I wanted to do something in the community came together in that moment, and I started experimenting with it. And then subsequently learned, gosh, there's a whole lineage of circle here. There's a whole body of work of other people who are doing precisely what came to me in that moment. How interesting that it came to me in that way. And so I started doing that work from there.
Which in itself is just such a beautiful story, the story of origin of Sister Stories. So I've got a couple of questions on that. How did you learn, when you were interviewing people for the documentary, how did you learn to create a space so safe that they would open up to you? Because I can imagine that they wouldn't open up to every single director or documentary maker. Right? There's something that you have. What do you think that skill or that art or that essence might be?
I think it's genuinely wanting to listen, and not listening from a head place, not listening from will that be good in the edit? And maybe I should ask that, but actually dropping from the head listening to the heart listening and opening myself up to that person. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, that role of listener is the most comfortable place I inhabit in life. I really like it. And I think that it's so rare, actually. I didn't quite realise this at the time, or at least didn't articulate it in this way, but most of us don't have spaces where we're truly listened to, where we are genuinely given someone else's ears for a couple of hours to share and to speak and to really be heard. And that felt the most important thing about my time in that field of work. And it carries over to what I do now. Listening is the most important gift that we can give someone when they're sharing their story. Not just thinking about what we might say, but truly listening with our entire being.
And allowing space for what needs to be shared without trying to jump in or respond. Which, everyone's a coach or has got some, label around a term that they know about that they want to jump in and give people advice on. So I feel like it's needed even more. So let's talk about I want to talk about your brain injury, because I don't think I can just skip over that. That's a huge life-changing, life-stopping, heart-stopping moment to go into surgery to have brain surgery. How did that impact your life? What were the ramifications of that?
It was so interesting, Naz, because it was one of those things where at the time it happened, I was living an incredibly stressful life. I was working really hard in this industry that had an incredible amount of pace, and I felt stressed all the time, and I was overworking all the time, and I'd had these terrible headaches for about 9 months, but it didn't occur to me to go to the doctors because they kept persisting. I just kept on going and going and going. And then one day when I did go to the doctors and say, I've had these headaches for rather a long time, and ended up having an MRI, and then it all unfolded from there. It was the first time in a very long time that I had to stop suddenly. And it's a familiar tale for many people. Many people have the version of this story where they're living their fast-paced life and then something big happens and they have to shift how they live. And that's absolutely my story. But the surgery was not particularly major in itself, but the hemorrhage that it caused which was an unexpected side effect, was really quite excruciating. And I was in this extraordinary place where, because of where the bleed was happening, the doctors weren't able to intervene. And they said, we're just going to have to see how this plays out. We can't do anything in this moment. And I felt like I was in this extraordinary place of waiting and not knowing what was going to happen. I was in extreme physical pain. But what happened in those few days was that it was like I dropped down into this place within myself where there was just this like cool lake of okayness, just this fundamental feeling of peace, of connectedness, of being okay. It was really fascinating. And I lived in that place and from that place for quite a long time afterwards. It's almost like I touched something of the essence of life in that experience. And I've never been the same since, because, I can still get caught up in pace and busyness and all the rest of it, like we all can. But I think that there was something that happened that day where I dropped down a layer beneath life and felt this, I can't describe it any other way than this fundamental sense of okayness, this peace, this tranquility. It was really quite extraordinary. And so when I get disconnected, that's the place that I drop back into. And that place is the place I facilitate my circles from, that deeper place, a layer beneath the everyday of life.
Well, you certainly, every time that I've met you and been lucky enough to meet you in real life, you have exuded that sense of okayness and peace and inner peace. And it's very calming to be around people whose nervous systems are as well regulated as yours. And you just said that's the place that you come to when you hold your circle. So let's talk a little bit about, and extraordinary story, by the way. I think to have that mystical, it is kind of like a mystical, profound experience that some people talk about, those moments of real clarity or touching on the essence of life or something beyond the surface. And I think that, I'm in the psychedelic field, and that's what people are often seeking, but just knowing that it's there inside of us without, you don't have to have some major disaster, or you don't have to have a big psychedelic experience in order to touch on that. But there is a disconnect at the moment. People don't know how to get there. And I do feel that sitting in stillness with yourself and acceptance and becoming okay with what is part and parcel of that journey to that place. And then you can keep drawing from that well. It's a font, isn't it, of never-ending source of what's the word? Like sufficiency. Like everything is okay. Everything, it's all enough. Everything is here. It's okay. But yeah, hard to describe. So tell me about facilitating circles. What skills do people need? Do they need to be a Zen, collected, peaceful? Like, do they need to bring that energy to circle? Or is there... And I'll let you speak. I'll let you answer that question. I don't want to lead you.
In short, no. I think it's interesting for those people who feel interested in circle work, and kind of, if you did a quick Google search of women's circles or an Instagram search, you'd find these images of women standing around in nature with long flowing robes, and beautiful young white women with flowing wavy hair, perfectly waved, not by a curling iron, but like just by nature to their waist. It's this really serene, idyllic image of women coming together in circle. And I think that is, it's beautiful, but it's often really unhelpful, actually, because if people feel drawn in some way to facilitate circle and have that, giving that gift to others and giving the gift to themselves of facilitation as part of their life, so many people feel, I'm not the type of person who can do that. I'm not Zen, I'm not a guru, I'm not trained as a therapist. People often think that they need to have a really particular set of professional qualifications. I don't look right, I don't speak right, I'm too loud, I'm too vivacious. All of these ideas of who we need to be to hold that kind of space that I talked about earlier. Actually, when I teach people to facilitate circle, and I've taught hundreds of women over the years to do it, the most important thing that people are there to do is to create a sense of connection and belonging in the space. And that sense of connection and belonging can only occur when the facilitator is coming from a place of authenticity and congruence to who they are. And so it's really important that for those people who want to hold circles, that you do it as you, not trying, if it's a place where you take off the masks and performances, you can't be performing in circle. It needs to be a place where you're authentically expressing yourself. And so that looks different to everyone. And I'll give you a really specific example of someone who once came to work with me and then sort of reimagined how she might be doing circles. So because I hold spaces that tend to be very tender and vulnerable and gentle and sort of grounded and calm, when I spoke to her about doing her own circle, she said, yeah, I really want to hold space for vulnerability. I want people to be able to share their most vulnerable stories. And she kept talking about this idea of vulnerability. And she came to train with me, and we got about halfway through, and she was like, I can't do it. I don't want other people's vulnerability in my space. It's too much. I'm not in a moment in life where I can do that anymore. Actually, what I really want to hold is circles where joy and celebration is at the heart. And she was a big character, and she wanted to bring that element of herself to her spaces. And so that's what she did, and that's what she does. And it would have been incongruent of her to hold those vulnerable spaces because it wasn't what she wanted to do. And so there isn't one type of person who can hold circle. There isn't one way to do it. As long as these principles of acceptance, compassion, connection, community underpin the philosophy of the circle, it can look any different way. And if we're hoping that we can move as a society towards a future where circles are embedded within the fabric of society, we need a really diverse range of people doing this. I have people who've trained with me who do it in corporate environments, who do it with couples, who do it in all sorts of different spheres of life, and they do it in their own way. And that's what makes people feel safe, because they're with people who are authentically expressing themselves. How refreshing to be in the presence of someone who's authentically expressing themselves.
I think that's amazing. I love the idea that maybe you even have, you would go to different flavours of circles depending on what you might want. Like you go, okay, well, I'm going to go to Gemma's because I want the tenderness and I've got something really vulnerable to share, or I'm going to go to this person because I know that it's going to be really joyful and actually I want a bit of a boost. There's a real sense of there's not one way to hold circle, right? Which I suppose is incredibly liberating, but is also can feel a little bit maybe scary or apprehensive. Like, well, how do I hold circle? What do you provide in your? Because I know you have this brilliant certification circle training that is CPD accredited, which is amazing, by the way. Congratulations. What's that container like? Because in itself, that is probably. Is that circular? How does that reflect what you teach people? What are they going to come away with when they come and partake in that training?
There's sort of two really important strands to it. And the first is a training strand, because we do want to be out there in the world holding really robust, really carefully thought through, conscientious, ethical spaces. And there's a lot of potential to cause harm in circle. It can really have a deep impact what happens in those spaces if it's not well facilitated. And so everybody who holds that space needs to have a really clear sense of groundedness in the principles of their space. What are they inviting people into? Having real clarity around what kind of space it is and what kind of space it isn't. Having an incredibly defined scope of practice. What is my role as a circle facilitator? And how do I express that? Okay, this is a space that might feel therapeutic with a small t, but I'm not a therapist with a big T. It's not a therapy space. Okay, so we need to be clear on that. And starting to get very, very clear about the intention behind the space and the guidelines of the space. So what can happen within the circle and what can't. Okay, so it's confidential, incredibly important. It's a space where we don't give advice, incredibly important. It's a space where, and then the facilitator can decide, how do we speak and listen to each other in this space? How do we know how to do that? And so it's almost like layer by layer. They're often very subtle. Circle is a really subtle art, actually, the facilitation of it. We're building things up layer by layer so that our participants have that feeling of connection, belonging, and the possibility to share that deep truth that I talked about earlier. So you need to have the skills to know how to do that. And interestingly, I get people from a broad spectrum of backgrounds. So I have people who've been working as a therapist, a psychotherapist for 25 years, and they are incredibly experienced in holding space for trauma and depth of emotion and doing all of that. And yet they need to reorient their practice into this different way of coming together and unlearn some of the ways of showing up in that space and move into a new way of working with people in groups. And then I get people who've never done anything like this before. In my most recent cohort, I had a former police officer, a pharmacist, a social worker, an opera director, a head teacher, just a really broad range of people. And so they get to sort of learn those skills as well. And so what we're trying to do is have a real sense of there being a strong, robust, ethical facilitator at the helm who's got the skills, but also is doing things like examining their biases and privileges. What might they unintentionally be bringing into the space? And that in itself is a lifelong piece of work, which we could talk about for 7 years. But, making sure that they're really treating this as a profession. We're dealing with people's hearts and their emotions and their openness. It needs to be taken really seriously. So there's that strand of things. But honestly, Naz, when people come into my training and my experience with walking this path, they often get in and say, I thought I was signing up to a training course, and it's called a training course. And it kind of is. But most of all, it's a personal path of devotion, actually, really walking this path of orienting yourself to a different way of being in the world, showing up with these circle principles, getting really clear on what your medicine for the world is through circle. How are you going to articulate it? What's the truth of what you want to express? And people think that they know themselves. They've often done quite a lot of self-development work already and will have done all the trainings and different things. But there's something about stepping into this work of circle that allows people to drop down a layer, to get more truthful about who they are and how they want to move through the world. And that's where the work is. It's beautiful to watch people. And so often people's lives take really unexpected directions as a result of doing it. And that's what the most wonderful part for me is, seeing how people start to live these circle principles of truth and authenticity in their everyday lives and in their work.
Such important work. And I feel being in the space, the medicine space, the psychedelic space, where often we're sitting in ceremony, and people are, they understand how to facilitate a ceremony, but actually the skills in facilitating the circle and the sharing are not yet there. I feel like this is needed in all gatherings and retreats and group experiences. What do you think, or what would be your hope for humanity if we were all to make the time to sit in circle? Because, what we're experiencing right now in the world is we're seeing is this incredible divisiveness over everything that's happening in the Middle East. It's palpable, it's everywhere. It feels like you can't have an opinion and someone's going to shoot you down. How might sitting in circle be able to somehow soften some of that? And this is all theoretical, but I'd love to know your thoughts on if you think it could have a benefit.
I talked earlier about how I sort of hold this vision for what society and the world might be like if this infiltrated all areas of the way that we show up in our workplaces and our family lives and everything else. And part of the reason that I think that's so important is that the thing about circle is that it brings us all back to our humanity. So many of these conversations are polarized and they're dehumanized, and we talk about numbers and statistics, and there becomes a sort of political outrage and headbutting that happens. And underneath it all, whether it's the conflict in the Middle East that's happening at the moment or other things that are occurring in our world, underneath it, the people who instigate these things are deeply hurted, hurt people. There's a lack of compassion there. There's a lack of humanity. There's an incredible complexity to every harmful act that happens to people and planet, and I don't know if you're aware of the work that reconnects from Joanna Macy, a beautiful facilitator who does lots of circle type work in the eco space. The principles of connection, compassion, coming back to our humanity, creating spaces for courageous conversations where we do listen to the emotional experience of the other side. We do open our hearts up. It's not going to solve everything overnight. Circle isn't the resolution to all of these complex problems, but it can create an opportunity to speak and to listen and to remember the humanity that should underpin it all, but often feels so absent in these conversations.
Yeah. It really reminds me of non-violent communication, the principles of like downing your weapons and understanding what the other side is going through and what's driving them, and connecting, and like you say, returning to your humanity. Because I feel on a fundamental level, we all want the same things. We all want to experience love, to be loved, to experience this beautiful planet for the short time, the brief time that we're on it, and to feel authentic and true. And I do genuinely believe that your medicine in Sister Stories is a really important part of this, as well as, you know, other people who are holding similar circles. So if someone's listening, Gemma, and they're going, right, I want to join a circle. I want to go and experience this. How could they find someone who knows what they're doing? Because you've spoken about the importance of someone knowing how to facilitate. It's not as simple as getting people in a room and asking them to share. There is an art to this. So how can they find a safe circle where they're going to be seen and witnessed and heard, and there's mitigate any possibility of harm?
I think that it's really helpful to check whether the facilitator, because you can find so many circles on Google readily. And I personally would always ask the facilitator whether they've had any training. I think that's really helpful. I really believe in the power of training. And on my website, we have a list of lots of people who've trained with me. And for those people who are in the UK, one of the women who went through my training a couple of years ago, a wonderful woman called Emma Johnson, has set up a circle listing site. It's called womencircle.co.uk. And on there, you find lots of people. Not everybody's trained with me, but often they have. And there's a beautiful array of people there who hold circles, and that's often a really good place to look. But I think finding out a little bit about the background of the facilitator can be really helpful. So many people are well-intentioned with these spaces, and they think it's as simple as just rocking up and doing it. And as you mentioned, in the psychedelic space, there are people who are excellent facilitators and space holders in different modalities, but don't necessarily have the sharing skills. And so making sure that that person really has a groundedness and has a practice of holding sharing spaces can be an incredibly important thing to do before you dive in.
Great. I love that your graduate or alumni has set up that site. I think that's a really wonderful resource. And if someone is listening and they are really keen to find out more about the facilitator training, how often do you run it? How long is it? When is the next one?
Yeah. So I run it a couple of times a year. The next one begins at the end of May. We're in 2024 at the moment, so I've got one coming up at the end of May, and it's 4 months long. It's a really deep, beautiful, immersive practice space to really dive deep for yourself. And we have a really interesting set of women come. That's part of it. The community is really diverse and really interesting. And so if you're interested, it's up on my website at the moment, which is sisterstories.co.uk. And you can drop me a line and have a conversation with me directly. I really like to make sure that the right people are in there, and I never try and persuade anyone to join. I just really like to make sure that we get you in if it feels the right time for you and that it will really serve you.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. And okay, so I know we're almost at time. We had a few technical issues at the beginning of the call, which is to shorten the time for us. But I just want to ask you one last question, which we ask all of our guests. And that is, if you were made Madam President for the day, and you were able to implement one change globally, what would that be?
That children start sitting in vulnerable circle spaces where they share emotionally from when they were 4 years old. How do we practice articulating our emotions in a group? How do we actually make that happen so that they become compassionate, emotionally aware adults who hopefully will tend to our world in a more responsible way than some of the ones running it at the moment?
I love that. Are there any children's circles? Do you know of any? Is that something that is that a thing?
Well, it's so interesting. I mean, lots of people do circle time at school, don't they? And there's a lot more of a literacy in children's spaces, but I think that there's more work to be done in that space.
Yeah, okay. And what's next for you, Gemma? Is there anything you want to share about what might be coming up, or is that for another episode?
That's for another episode. I've got plans, Naz. I've got plans.
I can feel them. I can feel another spiritual download coming in. Well, Gemma, thank you so much for your time and your energy and your wisdom. I always enjoy speaking with you. I am super keen to join one of your facilitation trainings. I think that everyone will benefit from learning this art and this skill. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Naz. Thank you.